Arulingam, speaking on behalf of the Movement for People's Council. We have called this press today specifically to speak about several incidents, including introducing two new laws, the Online Safety Bill as well as the Anti-Terrorism Act, Anti-Terrorism Bill, which has been introduced by the government, as well as racial attacks which has been going on in the north and the east. By and large, I will focus on these two bills. Now, the Online Safety Bill itself consists of more than 50 provisions. But what is most telling about this particular bill is that there is an online safety commission which is going to be established. Now, you all remember the George Orwell's 1984 novel, and in that there is a ministry called Ministry of Truth. And the Ministry of Truth, the job of the Ministry of Truth is to create or to identify or to create what is truth. So similarly, this government also has established this Online Safety Commission, and their job is to identify what is a false statement and what is not a false statement. And if they decide that something is a false statement, they also have a right to recommend punishment. And this Online Safety Commission is in fact appointed by the President himself. So the President appoints an Online Safety Commission, and that Safety Commission will decide whether what we say online is false or not. Now, just to give a very practical example, you will all know about this recent incident which happened in Kurundur Malai, where two factions, the Hindus are claiming or Hindus are stating that this site is a historically Hindu site, and there are a Buddhist mob which has come and which is forcibly constructing a Buddhist site in violation of a court order. So I'm not here to say which is the right version, but there are two conflicting versions. But if you look at the side of the Buddhist mob, they are also supported by the archaeological department. They are also supported by the military. So the Sri Lankan governments, consecutive governments, is known to create truth by using state institutions like the archaeological department. So given this political context in our country, what is a false statement? Who decides what is a false statement? And if you allow a singular Buddhist racist state to decide what and what is not a false statement, then we all know what the consequence is. Even recently, Facebook has been blocking posts which is against the government. For instance, we all know the central bank robbery on the EPF and ETF issue. And posts which have been put on this particular issue have been marked as false information. Who reported them, we don't know. But this is already happening. And similarly, we all know we have a president who ran a torture camp. And despite the fact that he has been discharged of all legal charges, there are eyewitnesses who state that they have seen this man, this president, overseeing this torture camp. So now if we talk about the Batalantha torture camp, does it now amount to a false statement? Simply because there are no legal charges. And who decides? That's the main question. Is this Online Safety Commission appointed by the President going to decide what is false and what is not? So while all of this is happening, we also have the Anti-Terror Act which is coming. Now the prevention of the terrorism acts in our country has a long history. First, the Prevention of Terrorism Act was introduced by J.R. Jayawardena. Now everyone knows why he introduced the Prevention of Terrorism Act. There was a neoliberal economic reform which was happening. Of course, there was an uprising. Neoliberal economic reforms happening under a racist project also. So there was an uprising in the north and the south. And this Prevention of Terrorism Act was brought to suppress this uprising. So that is the history of the Prevention of Terrorism Act. And then because there was a huge movement against the Prevention of Terrorism Act, then we have the Counter-Terror Act which was brought in 2018. Again, there was a huge movement against the Counter-Terror Act. Then there was another draft which was brought in March this year. And again, people protested against it. Now we have a new Anti-Terror Act. So the government keeps churning again and again and again these Anti-Terror Acts. And now we are told that this Anti-Terror Act is better than the Prevention of Terrorism Act. People did not ask the government to repeal the Prevention of Terrorism Act and bring a better law. That was not the demand. The demand was repeal the Prevention of Terrorism Act and stop there. So who asked the government to decide what is a better anti-terror law? The ideology behind anti-terror laws itself, there's an ideology behind anti-terror laws. What is the ideology behind anti-terror laws? If there's an act of mass violence, the state can define it as terrorist, detain mass groups of people for a long period of time, and then in their own free will decide who is a terrorist, who is not, who is going to be charged, who is going to be discharged, and so on. But when we look at the history of Sri Lanka, When we look at the history of Jaya Jayawardena, of Rani Vikramsinghe, of Mahinda Rajapaksa, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, we all know the biggest terrorist is the state. Whether it be during JR's time, the amount of violence which was imposed on the Tamil-speaking people, whether it be torture, whether it be killing, whether it be disappearances, whether it be removal from lands, whether it be forcible removal from lands, the amount of violence which was imposed on the Tamil people from 1950s onwards resulted in violence in the north, and the state branded it as terrorism. And then the Easter Sunday attack happened, and the entire Muslim community was branded as terrorists. But now we know, which we have already known, that it was the state which was behind it. So again, who is the terrorist? Who defines it? The state is defining who the terrorist is. Tamils were terrorists, Muslims were terrorists. Now the next batch of terrorists, who are going to be the terrorists? So this new anti-terror act is coming. It is no different to the acts and the drafts which have come before. I'm saying it's no different because there is a detention order. There are long periods of detention. The state has large powers. The president has been given large amounts of powers. And once you arrest a person as a terrorist, it does not matter how much power you give to courts. That person is going to be detained for a long time unless the act gives a very specific restriction on the period of detention. So therefore, this is a time of economic crisis and in economic turmoil. The state is doing everything in its power, from the Bureau of Rehabilitation Act to the Inland Revenue Amendment Act, now this online safety bill and this anti-terrorism bill. The state is doing everything in its power to create this legal architecture to suppress dissent so that people will not move into another democratic uprising. So we urge people to be vigilant of this. We urge people to come on the streets, protest this. There are of course provisions to go to courts and so on, but the powers of the court is very limited when it comes to laws. So we need to have a social movement against repressive laws which strengthens the oppressive arms of the state so that they can oppress the masses which are rising up against the state, economic, political and social oppression of the state. Thank you.